The 5K is the gold standard of distance running. It's the right distance to where it's still accessible for just about everyone to walk, race, hike, really to do anything you want. There's also no limitations to what types of 5K races you'll come across. Just about every holiday, terrain, and weather has some sort of 5K attributed to it. But what if I told you that there was a 5K so grueling that breaking 40 minutes is considered near impossible? This is a tale of some of the most classic running history, the best trail runners in the world, and unfortunately a slice of tragedy to go along with it. This is the story of the hardest 5K in the world, Mount Marathon. The Mount Marathon race started in the early 1910s in Seward, Alaska, but the earliest publications of the race date back to 1915 in particular. The origins of the first race is rumored to have been started over a bar bet, where multiple men wanted to see who could race to the top of the mountain and back within an hour. James Walters did win the race between 5 men, but did not break the hour mark, losing this supposed bet. This is mainly just known as an innocent local legend to talk about, especially since the race got its own formal mentioning in the newspaper as an official, organized race, but nevertheless is a fun tale to tell. As for the course itself, Mount Marathon is essentially a 3,000-foot climb over just a mile and a half, and then a descent of the same distance on the way back. Its grade on the mountain is estimated to be around 40 to 50%, and if you don't know how steep that is, here's a 20% grade hill for reference. The fascinating thing about this race is that there aren't any strict rules about how you get up necessarily, as there are multiple routes you could take to get up. Just reach the summit, around the big rock, and it's back down you go, which again, you have the relative freedom of how you choose to do that too. Just watch out for any potential snow, rain, mud, giant rocks, yourself. You're really just gonna have to be ready for any and everything to be thrown at you. Only very few men were up to this tall task back then, but nevertheless they saw a few participants every year. After 1919, the race underwent a 5-year hiatus, and then came back in 1925 with a fresh advertisement to go along with it. This cemented Mount Marathon as one of Alaska's prime time events, and it would continue to gain notoriety within the Seward community, even being used as a form of entertainment for teens, more specifically from the Jesse Lee Home, an orphanage based in Seward. The event wouldn't come without a couple more hiatuses though, some obvious and others remain a bit convoluted, especially in the 1930s where it randomly wasn't held from 1932 to 1938. It was then cancelled in 1942 due to the Second World War, but finally reclaimed itself as an annual tradition the Alaskan athletes could get underway with. It wouldn't be for quite a few more decades until 1985 where the women got their own separate race, and the 200 combined participant cap was officially loosened off as well around the early 90s, expanding to 300 runners. This allowed for not just more Seward natives to indulge in the mountainous bonanza, but even opened the door to potentially other trail enthusiasts who were looking for another challenge. The races had maxed out these capacities rather easily, and were even increased to 350 in 2004. Lastly, the juniors race was increased to a 300 split between girls and boys, creating a nice total of 1,000 potential runners who can choose to tackle this behemoth of a race. Mount Marathon was officially a jam at this point, and had all the momentum in the world to eventually solidify itself as one of the most notorious trail races ever. As the race entered the 2010s, all seemed fine and dandy, but unfortunately, accidents will derive from such an inherently dangerous race already, and while injuries were nothing new necessarily, one year stood out among the rest that resulted in perhaps the most mysterious and tragic events in trail running history. For Mount Marathon 2012, the weather was much less than ideal for a 4th of July celebration, and especially for climbing or descending the mountain. The rain, fog, and wind weren't exactly foreign to the Seward running veterans, but perhaps they are to those who were a bit inexperienced with this course, or in this case, not at all. 65-year-old Paul Michael Lemaitre started his wave of the race at about 3:15 p.m. While he was indirectly told not to do this race without any previous experience on the mountain, this would not stop Lemaitre from participating among the other veterans of the event. He would wind up being the last straggler to near the peak of the mountain after briefly conducting a conversation with race steward Tom Walsh. Walsh simply asked for Lemaitre's bib number, and Lemaitre relayed the digits 548. Walsh then relayed this information to the other race stewards, and that Lemaitre should be expected to return in around 90 minutes. After leaving him all alone to reach the summit, 5 p.m. had passed and no signs of Lemaitre at all. And by the time 8 p.m. arrived, search and rescue squads began the hunt and were using any means necessary to scour the area for any signs of his presence. Something had clearly gone awry at this point, so they began to take more drastic measures. After 6 more hours of intense searching, an infrared radar scan began to analyze the mountain with the use of a Pavehawk helicopter. While all hope was looking lost for Lemaitre's whereabouts, they continued on for a few days until they eventually had to call off the search after no success. more infrared scans, search dogs, ultra-high resolution pictures of the mountain. These were all valiant attempts towards what would ultimately culminate into a lost cause eventually. A decade later, Paul Michael Lemaitre remains unfound to this day. Lemaitre's wife sued the organizers of Mount Marathon for $5 million in July 2013, but after half a year, she settled for a small fraction of that. Lastly, 2 others had suffered serious injuries that same race, which was also unheard of too, one falling into a coma and the other breaking multiple ribs. Ever since that tragic day, multiple safety precautions had been implemented and revised, including some sort of written proof that the runner had run on the course before, a time limit to reach halfway up the mountain, and multiple checkups on the mountain by volunteer workers following each wave of the race. Mount Marathon 2012 was a tragic anomaly of an event. Thankfully, things would be smooth sailing in the upcoming years thanks to all of the changes, and the race would garner substantially more coverage and praise for its unique and brutally difficult charm that trail runners can't stay away from. It even managed to get a professional mini documentary made on it down the line, and continues to bring in thousands of more people to camp out on the streets of Seward for everyone to just take in. Now that you all know the general history of the event, let's get into the world record progression of the Mount Marathon times. The record, of course, starts from the very first iteration of Mount Marathon, where we mentioned James Walter winning this race. His time would be just over an hour, with the time of 1 hour and 2 minutes. The next year, Alan Bolin smashed it out of the park with a near 7-minute improvement, and it wouldn't be until another decade where Ephraim Kalmakov lowered it about 3 more minutes in 1929, running 52:35. The fascinating thing about this is that Kalmakov's exact age isn't really confirmed, but the Daily Seward cites him being as young as 14, but others have deemed him a couple years older than that. He was fostered at the Jesse Lee home, so he was most certainly a youth, which makes his record a phenomenal feat either way, given he beat runners that were very likely much older than him on average. Kalmakov's record was so far ahead of its time, in fact, that no one broke it for almost 3 decades. Most winning times near the hour mark until the 1950s, and it wouldn't be until 1956 where Sven Johansson ran the first 52-minute time since Kalmakov. It would only take him 1 more year until he ran the first 51-minute time of 51:40 and lowered it again to a 50:48 in 1959. At this point, the 50-minute barrier was more enticing than ever, and while there were a couple men who were close, Carl Bolin would be the one to crush the barrier by almost a minute and a half with a time of 48:37 in 1963. This was also the first year where a woman had finished the race, as Jane Trigg would put her name up on the board with a time of 1:37:08. Bolin's time was the catalyst that got the record dropping fast. Just the very next year, William Spencer ran the first 46-minute time with a 46:55, and then Jonathan Chaffee skipped right over the 45-minute zone, clocking in a time of 44:28 in 1967. Then he lowered it a couple more seconds in 1968. On the women's side, the record had fallen by about 20 minutes, as Marlis Kilcher ran 1:30:13 in 1966, and Joyce Patton dropped it all the way down to 1:16:10. The next man to hold the title would end up becoming the most dominant man of Mount Marathon, and he would pretty much set the ultimate precedent of records for years to come. Bill Spencer had begun his Mount Marathon wins in 1972, where he won the junior race and shattered the boys' record the year after. Turning 18 and now being forced to conquer the full mountain, Spencer saw this as no strange task to him, as he won his men's race debut, along with setting the new record right away with a time of 44:11. Spencer would continue to put up 44-minute wins after another when he would win, but in 1981, he would blow the Seward community away with a time of 43:21. What's even more fascinating is that Spencer managed to win races as late as 1991 before retiring from the race, but eventually returned and has competed as recently as 2021. With 8 senior race wins and the only 43-minute time, Spencer was the undisputed king of Mount Marathon, and the record stood for the longest time it had ever gone before. For decades, only 2 people had run in the 44-minute zone, and one was able to eye up Spencer's record with a high 43. In the 2010s, however, which was around the time the race started picking up more mainstream coverage, 44-minute times were now becoming a regularity. One of these men would happen to be the one to break Bill Spencer's record after 39 years, as Eric Strabel ran a time of 42:55, with a downhill section time of 10 minutes flat, the fastest ever run on record. Since the race started to attract trail runners outside of the US, it even managed to garner the attention of one of the best trail runners to ever live. In 2015, a trail running legend by the name of Kylian Jornet Bergada had booked a flight to Alaska after finishing up some training in France. Once he arrived, he immediately did a fairly hefty 7-miler with around 3,500 feet of climbing, but it wasn't until a couple days later where he got his steps in on Mount Marathon itself to scope it out, and he would do a little more exploring on other sections of the mountain the day before the race. With this, he had technically fit the qualifications, but his competition was going to be tough against the Alaskan natives, especially since the previous record holder was present too. Compared to Strable's record, Bergada and 2 others were up the mountain almost a minute and a half faster, and as soon as they made the turn, Bergada flew down with no one contesting him, as he was known as a fiend when it came to downhill running. By the time the camera cuts back, he's pretty much out of the mountain and looks incredibly relaxed approaching the finish line, coming through the chute in a new world record of 41:48, and his girlfriend Emily Foch-Barry shattered the women's record by almost 4 minutes, breaking the 50-minute barrier for the first time too, with a time of 47:48.
Cruising at this point. This guy could do that. He could go up and down the mountain again in virtually the same time.
Kylian Jornet is your winner of 2015 Mount Marathon.
A little kiss to the crowd.
Folks, that is domination.
In 2016, there was another instance of someone flying up the mountain right away, which is an incredibly risky strategy because you risk your downhill section being incredibly wobbly from the get-go. Alaskan runner David Norris, however, had already tried to form a gap from the very beginning of the mountain, with Scott Patterson just behind. Soon enough, Norris had about a minute lead, and he reached the summit in a new record of 30:35, which was 52 seconds ahead of Bergada's pace. The way back has quite a bit of snow, but the commentators note Norris's skiing prowess will come in handy, and he slides on down extremely fast, passing the scree in graceful succession. He's back onto the roads at the 38-minute mark, and as he approaches the finish, the rookie runs the new and last men's world record on Mount Marathon with a time of 41:26.
This thing in the stage.
All right, I am applauding. That is an incredible performance by David Norris, a rookie on this mountain who had only been up it a couple of times, and he just beat the best guy in the world by over 20 seconds. The best, considered the best mountain runner of the world, and he just broke his record by 20 seconds.
David Norris holds serve for Alaska.
The last record to occur would be in the women's race in 2022, where a Colorado trail runner by the name of Allie McLaughlin had an absurd time up the mountain and was able to come back down solidly enough to beat Foch-Barry's record with a time of 47:09.
Race. Allie McLaughlin, here she comes into the finish line, the 31-year-old from Colorado Springs for her rookie win, record-setting win at the 94th running of Mount Marathon. What a race from Allie McLaughlin. We thought we might have a race on the uphill. The race is going to be for second.
Mount Marathon is one of the most unique races on Earth, and undoubtedly the hardest 5K race you could possibly do. The grueling 3,000-foot climb, followed by a psychotic descent back into a beautiful city, is a concoction of emotions that the Seward community holds dearly to them. The fact that this race has been around for over a century now speaks such wonders and is something very few road races can say in general, and the amount of records, stories, and memories the Alaskan running community has shared among each other is something I'd imagine that can hardly be contested. It's also even attracted some of the best trail runners in the world, and who knows who might show up in the near future and will go on to make their mark on such an iconic race. This has been the story of Mount Marathon, and thanks for watching. Thank you to all my patrons for supporting the channel, and if you want to support the channel for more content like this, come on over and become a patron, drop a sub, and peep the Instagram too. I'll see you on whatever video I upload next, and take care.